Hello and welcome back to the Tox Lab. I'm Rebecca.
I'm Rob. This week we're looking at poppy seeds. This was an episode suggested to us by a listener, so thank you for that. Rebecca, poppy seed baked goods. Do you like poppy seed bagels?
I have to say, I just think bagels are disappointing donuts.
Fair enough. I quite like bagels, actually, poppy seed ones in particular. But here's a question. Have you ever had a poppy seed bagel or a poppy seed muffin before having a drug test?
No, I haven't.
We can chat a bit more about poppy seeds and drug tests a bit later on. But why don't we look a bit at what poppy seeds are, where they come from? We're all probably familiar with them, as I say, on our bagels or in our lemon and poppy seed muffins, maybe. But they've actually got a long history of poisoning people as well. So poppy seeds come from the poppy plant, obviously. That often red, although it isn't always red, is it? There's lots of different varieties. A big flower with a huge seed pod that grows in the middle. And they're absolutely filled with poppy seeds. I don't know if you've ever maybe grown one in the garden, but when they flower and the flower dies and you're left with that pod, they're absolutely filled to the brim with these little black poppy seeds. And the poppy plant is really, really interesting. It contains a whole host of different opioid compounds. Things you've likely heard of, like morphine and codeine. Also contains sort of lesser known compounds like noscapine, papaverine, and also a compound called thebaine, which we'll chat about in a little bit. And actually the seeds don't contain any of these opiates, do they? They're actually mostly found in the sap of the plant. So the poppy plant produces this opiate-rich latex. So these poppy plants, it's one particular species, isn't it? Papaver somniferum. And this translates to sleep-bringing poppy.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, they produce this latex. And this latex is quite rich in opiate compounds, morphine, codeine, things like that. And it's basically produced as a defense mechanism by the plant to stop herbivores from eating it. Tastes bitter, potentially it's toxic. And as we know, a lot of these compounds like morphine, codeine, they've got a lot of use in medicines. Poppies are often grown to harvest the opiate compounds for use in medicines. But as we said earlier, also these poppies produce a seed which is used in culinary uses. So the seeds themselves don't actually contain any opiates, but they can be contaminated with the latex as part of the harvesting process.
So people have been known to soak large amounts of poppy seeds to try and remove these opiate alkaloids found in the latex that may have contaminated the seeds in the form of a tea. And some regular users of poppy seed tea can consume approximately 280 milligrams of morphine.
That's a lot of morphine. So a typical dose for somebody who's completely opiate naive might be 15, 20, 30 milligrams of morphine for pain relief. So 200 or so milligrams in one setting is quite a lot.
And as we've said earlier, the Papaver somniferum poppy is what produces traditional opioids like morphine and codeine. You can get different variants. There's a variant known as Top 1, which is cultivated exclusively by the pharmaceutical industry. So this variant accumulates thebaine due to reduced conversion to codeine and morphine. And this is used to produce things like oxycodone, buprenorphine, naloxone, naltrexone. But because of this really high thebaine content, these poppy seeds aren't food grade, so shouldn't enter the food supply at all, and therefore shouldn't be consumed by humans.
So we've got different varieties of poppy, some of which produce morphine codeine, some of which have been selectively bred to produce thebaine, which, as Rebecca says, is used as a synthesis starting point to produce drugs that are what we call semi-synthetic opiate compounds. So things like oxycodone or naloxone.
So one of the reasons that the poppy seeds from that Top 1 variant aren't food grade because of their high thebaine toxicity is thebaine is known to be toxic. They're not entirely sure how it works. It's thought it could inhibit glycine.
So like strychnine.
Yeah.
And that, I assume thebaine does the same. You can get kind of like neuromuscular excitability, sort of involuntary skeletal muscle contractions, and sort of seizures and things like that.
Yeah.
And unlike sort of morphine and codeine, it doesn't act like a traditional opiate, does it? It doesn't bind to the mu-opioid receptor. It doesn't cause the sedation, the euphoria that we associate with use of more traditional opioids. In fact, if anything, it seems to sort of do the opposite.
So today we're going to be talking about an observational study from Australia where poppy seeds from the top one variant entered the food supply. So they looked at 23 analytically confirmed thebaine poisonings that occurred between the 1st of November 2022 and the 8th of January 2023 that were identified by 3 prospective toxicovigilance systems. They used the Emerging Drug Network of Australia, an organisation known as PRIZE, and then the Emerging Drug Network of Australia, but the Victoria division, to identify these cases. So all of these cases were males with a median age of 35, and poppy seed tea was regularly used in 18 of these cases where the information was provided, and the median amount of poppy seeds used to make a tea was 340 grams, which seems like quite a decent amount of poppy seeds.
It's quite a chunk, isn't it? Trying to imagine what I buy if I go to Tesco and buy poppy seeds. Probably buy a 500-gram bag, so about half a bag.
Some detail was given to how the tea was prepared. So 7 of these cases, acid had been added in the form of lemon juice, and this was thought to be added to help extract the opioids present in the latex that have contaminated the poppy seeds. 8 were extracted in cold water, and 6 used warm or hot water. So in all of these cases, clinical features occurred within about 4 hours of ingestion of the tea. Everyone presented with muscle spasms. 9 individuals suffered with rigidity. 6 suffered with convulsions, and all were treated with benzodiazepines. 5 individuals suffered from a metabolic acidosis with a raised lactate, and the median lactate concentration was 14.8.
It's pretty high, actually, isn't it?
It's a really decent lactate. And in 2 of these cases, interestingly, patients had muscle spasms, but no convulsions were present. Some also went on to develop rhabdomyolysis, so muscle breakdown, and had significantly raised CKs, or creatine kinase, which is a marker we look for to sort of diagnose rhabdo. And about 5 people also developed AKIs, or acute kidney injuries. 2 of these received continuous kidney replacement therapy, so probably dialysis.
So quite unwell, a lot of them, weren't they?
They were. In 2 of these cases, the individuals suffered from a cardiac arrest. So in one of these cases involved a 46-year-old male who had ingested 1,480 grams of poppy seeds extracted in cold water and lemon juice. He suffered from leg spasms 1 hour after drinking the tea, then developed generalised tonic-clonic convulsions and went into cardiac arrest. He suffered from a profound metabolic acidosis, developed an AKI and rhabdo, but did recover and was discharged on day 19. And the concentration of thebaine on admission was 2.4 milligrams a litre. Codeine was present at 0.04 milligrams a litre, and morphine was present at 0.04 milligrams a litre. The other individual that suffered from a cardiac arrest wasn't so lucky. This involved a 60-year-old male who developed a hypoxic brain injury and died on day 14. At presentation, his thebaine concentration was 5.6 milligrams a litre. Codeine was present at 0.3 milligrams a litre, and morphine present at 0.06 milligrams a litre.
So what happened in these cases? Why was the thebaine content so high?
Well, they believe that the poppy seeds that they were using to make the tea were these high thebaine variants that shouldn't have entered the food supply chain at all and had just somehow gotten into the supply chain. And these were sold in Coles, which I understand is quite like a big supermarket chain in Australia. So it would have been widely available to lots of people and therefore putting lots of people at risk of thebaine toxicity. I don't think they're entirely sure how that happened, but there was definitely a cluster in Australia of people presenting with thebaine toxicity after drinking poppy seed tea.
I think Australia's quite a big producer, actually, of high thebaine poppy, specifically for use as a precursor for pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I think along with France and Spain, Australia is one of the highest producers of that top one poppy variety.
So these were not only from high thebaine content poppies, they must have been significantly contaminated with latex as well.
Yeah.
So they must have been effectively unwashed poppy seeds. And that kind of takes us on to the sort of point really about what counts as a food grade poppy seed and what doesn't. And as we said at the start, the seeds themselves don't actually produce the opiate compounds. It's if they're contaminated with the sap during the harvesting. So food grade poppy seeds are washed quite extensively and have got relatively low content of these opiates. So this cluster of outbreaks in Australia isn't the only cases, are there? We've also seen cases of overdose whereby people have brewed poppy seed tea and extracted out large amounts of the morphine and codeine. So from varieties of poppy that contain higher amounts of more traditional opiates.
So the next paper we're going to talk about today involves poppy seed opioid exposures. And the cases we're looking at in this paper were reported to the National Poison Data System between 2000 and 2018. And they found 591 exposures during this time period of people being exposed to poppy seeds and then reporting this. So out of these 591 exposures that were reported, over 2/3 of these were in people over the age of 13 years, and over half of these were intentional exposures. Those who were intentionally exposed were mostly male, compared to females who were most likely to be unintentionally exposed. And of these intentional exposures, 74% of these were single product exposures.
So situations where the only thing they were exposed to in that poisoning situation was the poppy seeds. Is that right?
Yeah. So 290 people were only exposed to poppy seeds in single product exposures. 94% of these had ingested the product. Over 2/3 of them had at least one symptom, and common symptoms included drowsiness, vomiting, nausea, respiratory depression, and pinpoint pupils. At least half of them were treated or referred to a healthcare facility, and just under half had at least one therapy, so whether this was being given fluids or naloxone or oxygen, things like that. There were a handful of cases, 26, of which a major effect or death was the outcome, and poppy seeds were likely to be attributed to this outcome. So there were 18 non-fatal overdoses and 8 deaths, the median age of which was 24. 20 of these had ingested poppy seeds as a tea, but all of these cases were considered like intentional exposures. 6 had a history of depression, anxiety, and alcohol use disorder. So looking into the details of these cases, 9 of them had lab tests which showed substances other than opiates present. 12 cases had medical histories which showed that they were on other substances. And so I think in total about 14 cases, multiple substances were involved. Benzos and cannabis were being the most common.
So non-food grade poppy seeds, as we see here, can be associated with poisoning. Both the Australian cases through thebaine toxicity, or the American cases which showed a lot of respiratory depression, which is consistent with morphine exposure from the poppies.
So the brewing of poppy seed tea may be viewed by some as a cheaper, quote-unquote, lower-risk alternative to street opiates, or an alternative to use when opioids are unavailable. But I think the studies we've looked at have highlighted that there still is substantial risk associated. There's going to be variations in opioid content or potentially compounds like thebaine in poppy seeds that aren't necessarily food grade, different extraction methods, like the use of an acid like lemon juice or water temperature can affect the extraction and therefore how much you're being exposed to. And that can all contribute to a risk of overdose.
I think that's the biggest thing here, isn't it? It's that inconsistency, batch to batch, how much morphine, codeine, or thebaine is present in your seeds. And I suspect that's hugely variable, given that it's essentially how contaminated with the latex are the seeds. It's going to be huge amounts of variation, isn't there?
Yeah.
Plus different varieties of poppy producing different amounts and things like that. So, should unwashed poppy seeds be regulated?
I mean, potentially, as we've talked about in this episode, there are risks associated with unwashed poppy seeds, and there is a potential for abuse if people get hold of them and know that they might contain latex, which has the morphine, codeine, and things like that in there.
So let's look at food grade poppy seeds in particular then, the kind of poppy seeds that you might put on your bagel. How much morphine, codeine, and so on do they contain? So I did some maths, and what they call low alkaloid seeds, or the food grade poppy seeds, they typically contain up to about 4 milligrams of morphine per kilo of seeds. So in order to reach a sort of 10 milligram dose, you're looking at kilograms worth of poppy seeds.
That's a lot of poppy seed
Which
bagels.
would be a lot, yeah, precisely. Which would be a lot of bagels. They do contain low levels, though. People who may be in their line of work, like lorry drivers, have to get a drug test and they test positive, and it's because they've eaten a couple of bagels. I believe the US have now increased their cutoff to avoid potential false positives from bagel consumption. So in summary, poppy seeds can be very high in traditional opiates, or indeed some lesser known but still toxic opiates, thebaine. But actually, most of the time, if you're just eating a poppy seed bagel or two, you're really unlikely to come across any significant issues. Obviously, preparing poppy seed tea, on the other hand, can carry with it quite a few risks. Differences in sources of poppies, degrees of unwashedness, and also different brewing methods. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I hope you've enjoyed listening this week. Do give us a like and a follow on social media.
You can find us on Instagram at _tox_lab. Feel free to comment on any of our posts about any of our episodes. You can send us a direct message with suggestions for future episodes or any feedback you might have. For those of you who don't use social media, you can email us now. Our email address is thetoxlab@gmail.com, and that can also be found in the description below, along with all the papers that we've talked about in this episode. Hope you all have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.